Imagine a deal so good, it eventually destroys you. Not like a slow poison. More like winning the lottery, buying a mansion, and slowly realizing you forgot how to cook because you've been ordering takeout for 50 years. And now the restaurant is closing. And you're standing in your enormous kitchen, staring at the stove, going, wait, how does this work again? That's roughly where America is right now with manufacturing. Welcome to the inaugural video of the Global Perspective. On this channel, we discuss macro events, economic history, and how they might impact you. Basically, the butterfly effect of the Bank of Japan raising rates and your stock portfolio cratering overnight. The United States used to make everything. Cars, steel, televisions, shoes, chemicals. You name it, America built it, shipped it, sold it. Then, slowly and then all at once, it stopped. And the crazy part? It didn't happen because Americans got lazy. It didn't happen because of bad management alone. It happened because of a deal made in the desert in 1974. A deal involving oil, dollars, and a handshake that quietly ran the entire world for 50 years. And right now, that deal is falling apart. There's a war. There's chaos. There are fracturing alliances. And buried inside all of that mess might be the strangest gift American manufacturing has ever received. Let's talk about the dollar dilemma. Part 1, Oil is everything. Before we talk dollars, we need to talk about oil. Because oil isn't just fuel. Oil is civilization. The fuel filling up your car, oil. The fertilizer growing your food. Made from natural gas, oil's cousin. The electricity powering your home. In much of the world, still oil and gas. The plastic in your phone case, your water bottle, your chair. Petrochemicals, oil. Oil is the invisible skeleton of the modern world. The globe consumes 102 million barrels a day or 16.2 billion liters a day, enough to fill 6.5 million Olympic swimming pools. Every country on Earth needs it. There are no exceptions. Not rich countries, not poor countries. Not countries with windmills and solar panels. Everyone needs oil. Which means whoever controls how oil is paid for holds the biggest lever in the entire global economy. Sit with that for a second. Not who owns the oil. Not who pumps the oil. Who controls what currency it's traded in. Because that's the game. That's always been the game. And for the last 50 years, that game has been rigged, very deliberately, in America's favor. Part 2, Bretton Woods, the original deal. It starts in 1944, when 44 nations meet to agree on a new world monetary order. World War II is still raging, but the Allies can see the finish line. So 44 countries gather at a hotel in New Hampshire, the Bretton Woods Conference, and they decide what the post-war world's money will look like. Their conclusion: the US dollar will be the world's reserve currency. Every other currency pegged to the dollar. And the dollar itself, backed by gold. 1 ounce equals $35. Fixed, reliable, as good as gold. The logic made sense. After the war, the United States had 2/3 of the world's gold reserves and 3/4 of its invested capital. America was the last economy standing. If anyone's currency was going to anchor the world, it was going to be the dollar. And for 25 years, this works beautifully. America rebuilds Europe through the Marshall Plan, trades with the world, and dollars flow like a river into every corner of the global economy. But then America starts spending a lot. Vietnam. The space race. The Great Society social programs. All of it costs money the government doesn't quite have. So the US starts printing more dollars than it has gold to back them. More dollars chasing the same amount of gold. Basic math starts to get uncomfortable. Part 3, Nixon's dollar depegging. On August 15, 1971, President Nixon walks up to the microphone and does something historic. He closes the gold window. The dollar is no longer convertible to gold. No more swapping your dollars for bullion at the Federal Reserve. The dollar is now backed by trust. And vibes. Largely vibes. It's backed by the full faith and credit of the United States government. Markets go haywire. The dollar tanks. Inflation spikes. The world freaks out. Foreign governments who were quietly planning to cash in their dollar reserves for gold are now holding a currency backed by nothing but America's reputation. And then, just to make things worse, war hits. The 1973 Yom Kippur War. Arab nations embargo oil to the United States. Gas prices quadruple overnight. People queue for hours at petrol stations. The economy seizes up. Inflation goes through the roof. And America is suddenly very aware of how dependent it is on foreign oil priced in a currency it no longer fully controls. America needs a new plan. Fast. Part 3, Kissinger's Desert Deal. Enter Henry Kissinger, U.S. Secretary of State. A man who treated geopolitics like chess, moved pieces without sentiment, and had very little time for people who didn't understand the board. Nixon sends him to Saudi Arabia in 1974 with a proposal so simple it's almost rude. Sell your oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, we'll give you military protection. Forever. Saudi Arabia agrees. And just like that, in one handshake in the desert, every country on earth becomes a forced customer of the US dollar. Because every country on earth needs oil. And now the only way to buy oil is with dollars. Which means every country on earth has to acquire dollars. Which means everyone is constantly working to prop up demand for American currency. Here's how it works in practice. Step 1. Japan needs oil. Japan can't pay in yen. Step 2. Japan sells goods to America for dollars, then ships those dollars to Saudi Arabia for oil. Step 3. Japan also stockpiles extra dollars in US Treasury bonds, just in case energy prices spike and they need reserves. Step 4. Saudi Arabia earns more dollars than it cannot possibly spend domestically. So it invests them right back into US stocks and bonds. Money flows out to buy oil. Then flows right back in. This is called petrodollar recycling. And it is one of the most elegant financial arrangements in human history. Money leaves America, buys the world's most critical resource, and then comes home. Like a financial boomerang that always returns. This gives America 3 genuinely extraordinary superpowers. 1. A permanently strong dollar, which supercharges American purchasing power and makes imports cheap. 2. Insanely low borrowing costs, because every country on earth is buying US Treasury bonds just to hold dollar reserves. 3. The ability to economically destroy any country through sanctions alone. No tanks required. No invasion. Just cut dollar access and watch the economy collapse. But then everything changed in 2022. When the US sanctioned Russia in 2022 over Ukraine, they didn't send in troops. They just cut dollar access. Russian banks couldn't trade internationally. Companies couldn't pay foreign suppliers. The ruble went into freefall. Overnight, Russia went from a global economy to an isolated one. The US can economically obliterate a country without firing a single shot. That is petrodollar power. That is what a reserve currency with military backing actually looks like in practice. Part 4, The Curse Inside the Crown, the TRIFFIN dilemma. But here's where the story gets philosophically uncomfortable. Because being the world's reserve currency, It comes with a catch. A structural, mathematical, unavoidable catch. And most people never talk about it. Back in 1960, more than a decade before Nixon closed the gold window, a Belgian-American economist named Robert Triffin testified before the United States Congress. He was soft-spoken, he had a thick accent, and he delivered a warning so inconvenient that the US essentially looked away from it for 60 years. He said, if the dollar is going to be the world's reserve currency, America has to run trade deficits. Permanently. Not temporarily. Not until the economy recovers. Permanently. Because the only way to get dollars into the world is to send more money out than comes back in. To buy more than you sell. This became known as the Triffin dilemma. And it is basically a curse written into the mathematics of reserve currency status. Think about what that actually means. To supply the world with dollars, America has to let cheap foreign goods flood in. Every cheap imported car, every cheap imported television, every cheap imported piece of clothing is also a dollar leaving America and going abroad. That's good for the system. That's how the world gets its dollars. But it kills domestic factories. Jobs vanish. Entire industries hollow out. Detroit doesn't just lose to lazy management or cheap foreign labor. It loses to a structural flaw baked into the global financial system. And it gets worse. Because the dollar needs to stay strong to be trusted as the world's reserve asset. Strong dollar means American exports are expensive. A strong dollar is effectively a permanent, invisible tax on every single thing the United States tries to sell to the rest of the world. So you end up with this impossible triangle. Reserve currency status. Manufacturing strength. Manageable national debt. Pick two. You literally cannot have all three simultaneously. The system won't allow it. And here's a man who understood this tension more than you might expect. In October 2024, Trump said at Economic Club of Chicago, if we lost the world standard dollar, that would be like losing a war. Now here's the irony. Trump also wants to bring manufacturing back to America. He has tariffed everything in sight. He has given speech after speech about factories and workers and making things again. He genuinely believes these two goals, reserve currency dominance and manufacturing revival, can coexist. But his own top economist, Steve Mirren, chair of the White House Council of Economic Advisers, has essentially admitted they can't. Mirren said publicly, our financial dominance comes at a cost. Demand for dollars has kept our borrowing rates low, but it has also kept currency markets distorted, making our firms and workers uncompetitive on the global stage. The administration is trying to have both. And economists are politely, and sometimes not so politely, pointing out that this is not how any of this works. And separately, the same administration added $3.4 trillion to the federal deficit with new tax legislation. Which is not exactly a confidence-inspiring move if your main concern is maintaining global trust in the dollar. For 50 years, Washington chose the crown. The financial empire. The exorbitant privilege, as that irritated French finance minister once called it. And slowly, quietly, the factories went dark. Part 5, the world noticed. And didn't like it. Now here's the thing about arrangements that benefit one party disproportionately. The other parties eventually notice. The world isn't stupid. And eventually, country after country started looking at the petrodollar system and going, wait. We do all the work, we send all the goods, we hold all the dollar reserves, and America gets to run infinite deficits and print money without consequences. That's the deal. The rebellion started quietly. Almost invisibly. Russia-India deals. Yuan oil contracts. BRICS Summit 2024. India started paying Russia for oil in rupees. China and Russia began settling oil trades in yuan. France, a founding G7 nation and historically a close US ally, finalized a liquefied natural gas deal with China priced in yuan in early 2024. The BRICS bloc expanded in 2024 to include Saudi Arabia, Iran, and the UAE, countries now collectively representing over 45% of global oil production. And then, on June 9, 2024, something happened that barely made the front page, but should have stopped traffic. Clock ticking quietly. Saudi Arabia lets 50-year petrodollar agreement expire without renewal in June 2024, no dramatic press conference. No emergency Federal Reserve meeting. Just silence. The kind of silence that precedes earthquakes. The kingdom can now accept yuan, euros, rupees, even rubles for its oil. It has signed multi-year oil supply contracts with China priced in yuan. It has joined BRICS. Now, and this matters, the dollar has not collapsed. About 80% of global oil trade still happens in dollars. Saudi Arabia still pegs its own currency to the dollar. It still holds over $135 billion in US Treasury bonds. Anyone screaming that the dollar is dead next Tuesday is getting ahead of themselves. But the direction has changed. The dollar's share of global foreign exchange reserves has already fallen from 73% in the year 2000 to around 57% today. That is not a collapse. That is a slow bleed. And slow bleeds, if unaddressed, eventually become something far more serious. The dollar isn't dying. It's aging. And the world is patiently, methodically building off ramps. Part 6, the war that turbocharged everything, and then, February 28, 2026, things got dramatically less gradual. Joint US-Israeli airstrikes hit Iranian leadership and military infrastructure in a coordinated operation. Supreme Leader Khamenei was killed. Iran retaliated immediately with missile and drone strikes across Gulf states hosting US forces. And the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow maritime corridor through which 20% of all globally traded petroleum passes every single day, was effectively shut down. Oil tanker routes highlighted. Price charts spiking sharply upward. The head of the International Energy Agency called it the greatest global energy security challenge in history. That is not a phrase the IEA uses lightly. The Dow Jones fell 400 points in 2 days. European gas prices nearly doubled. Qatar LNG shipments, which much of Europe depends on to heat homes and run industry, were suspended. Economists started using the word stagflation. Central banks started postponing rate cuts. The world held its breath. The Middle East Monitor put it clearly. A major regional war involving Iran threatens all 3 pillars of the petrodollar system simultaneously: stable Gulf energy production, dollar-denominated oil trade, and the US security architecture underwriting the entire arrangement. Countries that were already quietly moving away from the dollar are now moving faster. Because when you have just watched the United States military shut down the world's most important oil choke point, you start thinking very seriously about whether you want your entire energy supply priced in that country's currency. Iran and Russia had already spent years building parallel financial infrastructure. Their own SWIFT alternative. Ruble-Rial exchange mechanisms. Integrated payment networks designed specifically to operate outside the dollar system. That project, which once looked like a fringe contingency plan, suddenly has a very long queue of new interested parties. And there is something else happening that is harder to quantify but perhaps more important. The war has done something to trust. Deutsche Bank's global FX head wrote publicly that markets were witnessing a simultaneous collapse in the price of all US assets, equities, the dollar, and the bond market, at the same time. The bank said the cracks in the petrodollar system was showing before the conflict, and there could be significant downstream effects to the dollar's use in global trade and savings, and the dollar's role as the world's reserve currency. Stanford economists documented that European investors were demanding 2.2% more per year just to hold US Treasury bonds in the aftermath of Trump's tariff announcements. Nearly a third of all US Treasury debt is held by international investors. If they stop believing in the safety of that asset, even partially, the consequences for US borrowing costs are severe. For the first time in generations, the safe haven story, the foundational logic underneath the entire petrodollar system, is being publicly questioned by mainstream institutions. Not abandoned. Not broken. Questioned. And in financial systems, once serious questions start, they have a stubborn tendency not to stop. Part 7, the silver lining nobody is talking about here is the counterintuitive part. The part that almost nobody is connecting out loud. If the petrodollar fades, if the dollar gradually weakens as its global dominance erodes, if America's role as the unchallenged center of global finance diminishes even partially, American manufacturing might actually come back. Not because of tariffs. Not because of political speeches. Not because of national pride. Because the structural curse that has been quietly strangling American industry for 50 years is starting to lift. US export competitiveness chart beginning to rise. A weaker dollar makes American-made goods cheaper for the rest of the world to buy. It makes cheap foreign imports more expensive at home. It tips the competitive scales, slowly but meaningfully, back toward making things rather than just consuming them. This is not a new observation. J.D. Vance, before he became Vice President of the United States, said it quietly in a Senate hearing in 2023 while questioning Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. Vance said, "In some ways, you can argue that the reserve currency status is a massive subsidy to American consumers, but a massive tax on American producers." He is not wrong. The exorbitant privilege worked beautifully for Wall Street. For Walmart. For anyone who wanted cheap consumer electronics and affordable clothing imported from Asia. It was a slow-motion disaster for the factory floor. Now look at what is already quietly happening. The CHIPS Act is funding the construction of domestic semiconductor factories on American soil. Apple is beginning to shift some production stateside. The Inflation Reduction Act has channeled hundreds of billions into domestic clean energy manufacturing. These are not coincidences. They are bets, by both governments and large corporations, that the era of frictionless, cheap globalization underwritten by an unchallengeable dollar is ending. And the Middle East conflict, the BRICS expansion, the slow erosion of petrodollar dominance. These are, perversely and painfully, exactly the kind of external shock that makes domestic manufacturing financially viable again. When it becomes genuinely riskier to depend on global supply chains denominated in a currency that is being weaponized and questioned. When energy prices spike because of a war the dollar system helped create. When the financial architecture that made offshoring so cheap starts showing real cracks. Suddenly, making things at home does not just feel patriotic. It makes hard financial sense. The world's loss of faith in the dollar might be the factory workers' gain. Part 8, but let's not get too excited. Now, and this is genuinely important, we need to pump the brakes slightly before anyone starts ordering champagne for the Rust Belt. The dollar is not dead. Anyone confidently telling you it is about to collapse next quarter is probably selling you gold coins or a newsletter subscription. The dollar's dominance rests on advantages that no rival currency can replicate quickly. American financial markets remain the deepest and most liquid in the world. US Treasury securities remain the benchmark safe asset for global investors. The network effects are enormous, because so many international contracts and transactions already run in dollars, switching costs are massive. The euro is fragmented across 20 different economies with different fiscal policies. The yuan has capital controls that no serious global reserve currency can sustain. Bitcoin is, well, Bitcoin. And the United States still operates 11 nuclear-powered aircraft carrier groups, which remain a fairly compelling argument in any currency negotiation. What the evidence actually points toward is something more nuanced. Gradual evolution toward a multipolar monetary landscape. The dollar stays central to global finance, but it shares more space than before. It exerts less total control. Regional trade increasingly happens in regional currencies. The dollar's share of global reserves continues its slow decline from 73% towards something lower, over years and decades rather than overnight. And in that world, a world where the dollar is important but no longer unchallengeable, the mathematics for American manufacturing quietly but meaningfully shifts. The curse of the Triffin dilemma loosens its grip. It will not be painless. The transition will bring real inflation as import prices rise. It will bring higher borrowing costs for the US government and for American households. It will bring disruption for millions of consumers who have built their lives around cheap imported goods. There is no clean version of this story. But for the first time in 50 years, the structural incentives are moving in the right direction. So here is where we land. For 50 years, the United States made a trade. Give up manufacturing, gain financial dominance. Export dollars, import goods. Run deficits, print money, avoid consequences. It was a phenomenal arrangement for Wall Street, for consumers, and for Washington's ability to project global power. It was significantly less fantastic for Ohio, or Michigan, or Pennsylvania. A handshake in the Saudi desert in 1974 built a financial architecture that quietly ran the world. The petrodollar system kept America powerful, kept borrowing cheap, and kept the factories dark. Now that architecture is cracking. Not collapsing, cracking. The Middle East is on fire. BRICS is building alternatives. The dollar's share of global reserves is on a long, slow slide. And for the first time since Kissinger boarded that plane to Riyadh half a century ago, the structural incentives are beginning, just beginning, to favor making things again. Whether America can actually seize that window is a different question entirely. Whether Washington can translate financial disruption and geopolitical chaos into genuine industrial renaissance requires policy discipline, long-term thinking, and sustained investment, none of which are things American politics has historically been great at. If this video made you think, made you angry, or made you want to argue in the comments, please do subscribe, drop your take below, and tell me honestly, do you think American manufacturing can actually come back? Or is this the most optimistic spin on a 50-year slow decline you have ever heard? See you next time on The Global Perspective.